You often use the phrase, living inside the dementia life.
That sounds like a 360-degree lesson, right?
Chances are they're going to hold on to that and say, this is a reminder of why I do what I do.
Welcome to the Empowered Elder Podcast.
Dementia is something many of us hope we'll never have to face. And yet, for millions of families, it's already part of daily life. It often shows up quietly at first. A missed appointment, a repeated question, a change in behavior. And before families realize it, they're navigating a world they never expected. One filled with uncertainty, fear, and a lot of unanswered questions. And the reality is, this isn't a rare experience. According to the Alzheimer's Association, nearly 7 million Americans aged 65 and older are currently living with Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia. And that number is expected to nearly double by 2050 as our population continues to age.
But dementia is often misunderstood. It's frequently talked about only in terms of loss of memory, loss of independence, loss of the person we once knew. Yet researchers at the National Institute on Aging remind us that dementia is not just about memory. Emotional awareness, personality, and the ability to connect often remain, especially when communication is intentional and compassionate.
And that understanding changes everything. Because if connection is still possible, if joy, meaning, and dignity can still exist, then how we show up for someone living with dementia truly matters. It means this journey doesn't have to be defined only by fear or grief, but can also include moments of presence, humor, and even hope.
That's exactly why today's conversation is so important. Our guest, Cody Kohlhagen, has spent more than 17 years walking alongside people living with dementia, not just caring for them, but learning how to truly live with them. Through his work in companion care, life enrichment, and now as Community Development Director at Belleview Heights, Cody helps families see beyond the diagnosis and rediscover connection. Known for his heartfelt stories, practical tools, and unforgettable Codyisms, Cody reminds us that even in dementia, there are silver linings if we know where to look.
Let's dive into a conversation full of insight, hope, and real-life success stories. Welcome, Cody.
Well, welcome, Cody.
Thank you, ladies.
Let's start with your journey and your calling. You had a companion care job during college, and that pretty much, from our understanding, turned into a 17-year calling for you. Can you tell us a little bit about those early moments with people living with dementia that changed the direction of your life?
Absolutely. I do have to start off that I'm originally from the South, and so I say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir.
We've noticed.
And my Granny Kitty was extremely influential in just impacting me. And so she appreciated all the little things. When the light turns on, when the water was warm, all those little things to just have gratitude for. And so when I was in college, pursuing a degree in psychology, I needed to help some kind of people. And I started with babies, then went to adolescents, not my calling. And when I went to Home Instead as a college young man to be a companion for the elderly, I went up to Evergreen, Colorado, and there was a couple living up there. And immediately their response to me in terms of, well, thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing that. We appreciate you showing up on time. All of the little things that some people might take for granted. Words of affirmation are my love language, and I felt very appreciated. And so I knew that I wanted to begin helping seniors. My second client was a woman that had dementia that was, at the time it was alcohol-induced dementia. They call it ethanol-induced. And it was pretty tough to see and to listen to a woman really cry out for help. And it made a big impact on me, knowing that I could just be helpful by being present, because humans tend not to want to be alone. And so just being present with her in her hospital room made an impact on her, made an impact on me. And in 2009, while I was working at an independent living and skilled nursing community, the opportunity came about to be an activity assistant. And so I went up into their skilled nursing neighborhood and became the activity assistant. And it was just like a puzzle piece that fit for me. And I felt like, while I found the door for my calling and being that companion, I really walked through that door at that community level to help all the people that were kind of that captive audience, that needs somebody to show up on time, show up with a smile. If you say you're going to do something, you should do it. And very quickly, I learned that sometimes intentionally or most often unintentionally, staff or team members will say, "Oh, I'll be right back with your coffee," or "I'll take care of that for you." And they have a plethora of tasks to do. So sometimes they don't get back right away like they said they would. And so it was very wonderful for me to say, I'm going to do something, and then I did it, and then them say, "Thank you for doing that. I appreciate you." And so it was just something that I knew I was going to stick with for the rest of my life.
Oh, that's a great story. I love that, to know that how that all came to be.
Was there a story or an impact that really got you to think, this work matters. This is why I do what I do?
Yes, ma'am. Little sweet lady named Eleonora, who always had her spot in the living room area. She always had her little knuckles folded like this with a red sweater over her shoulders. And prior to me getting there, she really didn't participate much. She just watched. And people watching is a passive activity, because I wonder what she does and where's he going. And we like to think about things, and kind of live vicariously through the people around us. And it was wonderful when she would play bingo or she participated in the spell out and shout game that we created. But the moment that was impactful was when we do the things that we do just kind of on autopilot. And one of those things was printing out the daily schedule or the weekly schedule and the weekly menu. And so I would go from the skilled nursing down to the copy machine and make 45 plus copies. And one day I said, instead of doing this by myself, would you like to go with me, Eleonora? And she said, sure. Mm-hmm. And so I brought her in a wheelchair down the elevator to the copy machine, and the copy machine was as big as a tank compared to little old Eleonora, and put it in to make two-sided copies. And when 45 plus copies came out, my typical task, grabbed it, and then I decided to hand it to her. And this sweet little old lady said, "Oh, it's so warm, it's so warm." And she actually put the paper on her face and was just in the sensation of the warmth of hot off the press. And it was like such a little task that I'm going to do, at least once a week, but I'm no longer going to do by myself. I'm going to include her, involve her, and let her experience the warmth of the paper, but I get to experience the warmth of our friendship, of involving her in life, and not just being the recipient of, here you go. Once I've done all the work, I want to include them on the work. And I came across a quote by an unknown person that says, "Tell me and I may hear it, teach me and I may learn it, involve me and I get to experience it." And so I love to create experiences for the residents because it's an experience for myself, and then I get to enjoy that moment all the more.
I love that you have that vision. Right? I think a lot of people just put the blinders on and do their job and go about their day, and they don't do the 360-degree awareness that comes out in that story. So I love that you connect with your residents on what that impact might be and what the experience does look like for them. That's fantastic.
And probably you will never look at making copies the same way again. Nope. Changes your perspective on that, right? It is a great story. You often use the phrase living inside the dementia life. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means and how does it shift the experience for both the caregivers and those who are living with dementia?
Yes, ma'am. We all have our own ways of thinking. We all have our own ways of doing things and putting reasons behind why we do what we do. Sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's subconsciously. And for residents with dementia, they don't always know why they're doing what they're doing. They're, in my mind, extremely mentally fatigued because the decisions that they make, folks with Alzheimer's would forget that decision and then need to make another decision or the same decision and then forget that decision and to make the same decision. And so it's just this cycle of continuation. And trying to understand their thoughts and why they are doing what they're doing and acting the way they're acting is so important for us to make a connection. I tell folks that I work with that you cannot reassure a resident too many times that they are safe, they are loved, and that they are a part of something. Because we don't want residents, I don't want my friends to feel useless. And if they aren't doing anything whatsoever, that useless feeling can arise pretty quickly. And so being able to understand the dementia mind is so important for me and for everybody in this field, for families, because we want to believe that they know what they're doing, that they know that their actions, why would you do something like that? But just like a developing brain is trying to figure the world out around them, those with dementia have a brain that is it is underdeveloped. It is instead of taking steps up or having a plateau, sometimes it dips down and they no longer know what the use of a fork is. And so it's just very important to try to get inside their mind and understand their personality. And we're going to talk more about all of that.
What education background do you have that gives you the understanding of what someone with dementia or Alzheimer's is actually going through?
And I do have to revert back, Tasha, to my Granny Kitty, and just appreciating the little things, because the big things don't always make sense to them, but the little things of turning on a light or holding a glass of water, those things can make sense to them. But for the education piece, I pursued a degree in psychology at Colorado Christian University. Again, that's where I did my internship. And getting that degree in psychology helped me understand the personalities of people and understanding the stages of development for younger persons, from babies on up to adolescence. And so when you're looking at someone, I've cared for residents in their 60s, cared for residents in their 90s, but where they are in their developmental stage is a really interesting thing. So leaning into that degree of psychology helps me understand, is it fight or flight? Is it, the ability to be successful and that validation of being successful or being unable to do things? And our personalities are very wide and varied.
Do you see families struggling with, their loved ones who have dementia and that interaction and how to kind of have that communication flow going? Do you see families struggle with that?
More often than not, yes, ma'am. Family members see their loved ones, and in today's medicine, we can fix so many things, but the mind is something that is very difficult to, quote, fix because it's just so complex. People can have lung transplants, they can even have a heart transplant, but you can't have any kind of brain transplant or you're no longer yourself. Family members, unfortunately, it's a very under-discussed disease, dementia. And so most people, when you say dementia, it's just all Alzheimer's, but that's very far from the truth. And so when families say, my loved one has Alzheimer's, they may not be correct in that diagnosis. And so family members, those that do more research for themselves, you see them be more successful in connecting with their loved ones. But the family members also are so mentally fatigued because they're having to help their grown parent or their grown spouse live a normal life, and they're making all of their decisions and the decisions for their loved ones to the point of they feel exhausted, both mentally, emotionally, and physically.
Well, it's confusing too. My dad had advanced dementia for 8 years. And it's very confusing for the family to understand the progress of the disease. And then the interaction becomes repetitive in some instances and completely counterintuitive in others, right? And so there's not a logical path. Like you and I having a conversation and we're sitting, just talking. It's a logical path of conversation.
Right.
With my dad, for sure, it wasn't a logical path of conversation. It would be, completely a different direction. And then yet come back to asking the same questions again and again. So what can families do to kind of understand that reality and that path? Because it's no longer a logic A to B, B to C, C to D kind of path. What can families do to really put some understanding and comfort around that communication with their loved one?
Great question. I think definitely digging into their past. And the reason I say that is because residents will identify oftentimes with a certain era, but it will be in this moment with you having this conversation, but then all of a sudden I'm thinking back to not 2 years ago or even 20 years ago, but 60 years ago. And so when I hop from not A to B, but A to Z, it's really important for families to try to learn that history of their loved one. I've really been looking into like the birth order, for example. When I've got someone with dementia, if they are the oldest of 7 siblings, it's almost guaranteed they had more responsibility at an earlier time in their life than the youngest in the family, who is the baby of the family, and all the chores got done and they get away with more and more lenient on them. So when a resident who is 70, 80, it doesn't matter how old, feels this sense of responsibility that they must do things, is there a correlation to the way they were raised? Because our personality is formed in our upbringing. There's nature and nurture, which again is leaning into the psychology of things. But I'm learning. I have a particular resident who is an only child, and her relationship with her father was so concrete that he would take care of everything and dote on her. And she now presents it like, well, I'm fine. This is a beautiful day and everything's fine. And I don't have to worry about a thing. And I see there is a connection because when she was 6 years old, she didn't have to worry about her thing. Dad took care of everything. Now, another resident who is an only child whose father maybe was, not around and unable to provide that sense of reassurance and that sense of, I got you and I'm going to take care of things. They had to raise themselves. And so they are finding it, I need to get all the answers that I can because no one's giving me answers. So then you layer on any form of dementia of I need to get the answers, and I've got my answer, and then I forgot my answer if it's Alzheimer's. Or I've got my answer, but with vascular dementia, there's more confusion than there is forgetfulness. I've got my answer, but that answer doesn't really make sense. And why doesn't that answer make sense? So I need to explore more for that to get the answers that I'm searching for, even though as either family members or caregivers, we're taking care of everything and we want you to trust us that we're taking care of everything. If they don't feel like things are being taken care of, that's why they're seeking out to get those answers. And kind of leans back to, you can never reassure someone with dementia enough that they are going to be okay, that we are here to help them get through this moment and this hour and eventually this day.
What would you tell a caregiver or a family member to help them not personalize the experience for themselves versus caring for their loved one?
That's a great question. It's those folks that have chosen to be in this field of care for those with dementia. We have pretty thick skin because we have been on the receiving end of a lot of harsh words, a lot of harsh feelings, and being able to separate fact from feeling is something that it takes practice. It takes you have to strengthen that ability to even be able to do that, because your loved one or this person you're caring for, especially with dementia, it is a terminal illness that's not going to get better. There's moments of that silver lining, and you live in those moments, and that's where you really have to remind yourself that when they are doing something, they don't have a fully functioning brain like you or I. So what is the reason behind what they're doing? It's difficult for family members and the caregivers as well. But realizing that we're in this, line of medicine, in this line of mental health, reminding yourselves that it is a disconnect of the brain is the reason they're calling me this name, or it's a disconnect of their functional skill, why they unintentionally made a mess. That is not their fault because they didn't intentionally do it. There is some experiences where a resident will intentionally do things, but again, what is the reason behind it? Because maybe it's to get your attention. A lot of detective work, as I call it, trying to figure out why they're expressing what they're expressing. And they say about 80% of the communication, at least in the community level, 80% of the communication that a resident is giving off is based on their environment. So is it boredom? Because if you put someone, I don't treat them like children, but a child's brain is developing. And if you put a 3 or 4 year old at a table with nothing on that table, it's only going to last a short few moments before that child is wanting to figure out something to do. And giving residents something to do is so very important. But we as the family members or the caregivers generally say, I'll do that for you. I'll take care of that. Don't worry, let me do it because we can do it a little bit faster. And we know we're not going to mess up because our fully functioning brain. Meanwhile, the resident sitting there being unable to do for themselves, we wonder why they're depressed, because we are enabling that feeling of being useless. And that's something that I educate family members on, educate caregivers on, and I even have to educate myself on that, because if I see something on the ground for the first 5+ years, I would always bend over to pick it up because that's what I'm there to do. But if a resident can successfully lean over and grab that thing off the floor, they're having to use their mind, body, all these motor skills in order to successfully do that, which is going to keep their ability on balance and reduce the possibility of a fall, because they still are doing for themselves.
That makes a lot of sense.
And can we talk a little bit about when you and I have shared this conversation before too, when you have a resident who is clearly saying something that isn't right, but you have a caregiver that wants to maybe direct them in a path and make it right. But how does a caregiver have those conversations with the resident as far as, if they think it's an experience from the past, or they're going to a different place and it's not in the reality? What would you say to a caregiver on how to approach the loved one and have those conversations when it's not really, doesn't reality or in present time?
Yes, ma'am. Again, trying to learn the individual is so vitally important, because when you're talking to 30+ people with dementia, or even 3+ people with dementia, knowing who they are as a person can help you find what I call that familiar ground, right? And understanding when they say, I need to go home, we don't want to just say, well, you are home. I like to, again, kind of do that detective work and probe and say, well, where is home? Or when you think of home, what do you picture? And I've had residents that, lived in a house for 50 years here in Colorado, but they're thinking about the home that they grew up in Nebraska or Texas or wherever. So we, as the functioning, fully minded persons, don't want to input what we think is the correct answer. We want to understand what they feel the correct answer should be. And if someone says, well, I want to go home to Nebraska, I want to be able to say, well, I'd love to help you get there. In fact, I've got all weekend to be able to do something like that. So how about we wait until Friday? And if they say, well, today's Thursday, even though it's a Tuesday. We say, well, then looks like we can get our bags packed after dinner tonight. And it's really, again, important to know what kind of dementia they have, because someone with Alzheimer's will almost always forget that after dinner we'll get our bags packed, whereas someone with vascular or Lewy body or these other kinds of dementia might say, you said we were going to go pack our bags after dinner tonight. So you don't want to give them false hope. And that's why people really worry about what's called therapeutic fibbing, because I don't want to lie to them and make their feelings any worse. But again, I equate it when a child's brain is developing, you have to talk to them a certain way in order to coax them to the outcome that you're hoping for that developing brain. And so as the brain is deteriorating, we need to be able to speak to where they are in their dementia journey, as they say, to be their guide. And we can be all that they need to be in that moment. Or again, sometimes it's just a little slight redirection to be able to get them off of this one thought and onto something new. And I really, really do harp on that sense of being useful. Because if you can tell a resident, I need your help with something, would you mind helping me with whatever that little task might be? It is that human condition to say, I'm needed, I'm valued. And as someone in my industry that wears many hats and does a lot of things for the residents, if I say, I need your help with this, all the more they feel very special, because I can't do it alone, even though I could. I want their help. And oftentimes when family members are rushing to get this task done because they've got another task to do and a task for themselves to do, it's a good reminder to take a deep breath, slow down and say, what is our hurry here? Because if they could help me with something and it takes 10 minutes to do with their help, it's better than finishing in 2 minutes and then having your loved one say, what now? What's next? What are we going to do? Or when are you taking me home? Or when I need to go back to work? They're 80 years old and they're perseverating on getting to work. If they're feeling useful at this table by, sanitizing the table for cold and flu season, they are working in this moment and they're not thinking about the job that was 80 years ago that still needs to get completed in their mind.
That's fascinating.
It is fascinating, especially when you talked about the difference in the different dementias and how to speak to that individual depending on what they've been diagnosed with, because it's totally different. I have a friend with dementia from not from Alzheimer's, but just Parkinson's, but you're right. If you say something to her, she's like, well, when are we going to do this? But she doesn't forget anything from that perspective, right? Mm-hmm. So directing it and just kind of directing the conversation so she's looking at something differently. But it's amazing when you said that. I never thought about that before.
Mm.
What are early signs that family members can look for or anticipate when there is the onset of dementia? Because there's early onset and then there's later age, mm-hmm. right? But what are some of the signs to know, we might want to get this looked at versus everybody forgets something every day?
Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, forgetfulness is also a human trait, right? Exactly. And nobody remembers everything all the time, that I'm really aware of. When a loved one is doing something and it doesn't affect their ability to successfully get through a day, such as, I'm at the grocery store, I needed something, but I can't remember what it was. And then you get home and you say, doggone it, I forgot the hamburger buns or something like that. I've been known to do that. I'm sure all people have been known to do that from time to time. The difference would be going to the grocery store, getting things and coming home. But the things you got from the grocery store have nothing to do with the lunches or dinners that you need to make. And they have no rhyme or reason to them whatsoever. In fact, you went to the grocery store and you spent all this money and we have all this stuff already at the house. Again, if I've been known to get something that I did have at the house, but if you were to get so many things because you were just in this mindset of I've got to do this, but there's no rhyme or reason behind it, that is a pretty important one. And again, I'm sure we've all misplaced our phones or we've misplaced our keys, but if you were to put it in a place that had no rhyme or reason, such as the microwave or the refrigerator, most people don't accidentally leave their phone in the refrigerator. That would be a sign of just not recognizing what you were doing with your belongings, which could then lead to a whole host of things. And that's where you'd start to see red flags, because not that doesn't, that's a little off. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever for our fully functioning brains. And if you see that on a, I would say, reoccurring or frequent basis, a cognitive test might be something that you would want to consider. And you can even look online and do what's called a mini mental exam to have your loved one try out the questionnaire and see how they perform. It's an interesting thing. Most people, humans, don't like to get really put on the spot and tested. And so when you say, why did you do that? Give me a reason. Or I want to test to make sure you still know what you're doing. A lot of people will either shut down, refuse to do it altogether. Sometimes they can really, stand up to that moment and accomplish what they need to accomplish because they know all eyes are on them. But for the most part, it's difficult for family members to see because, well, if I address this, we'll have to address what the results are. And so I'd rather just live with it for now because it's not as bad as it could be, because while I occasionally find the keys in the refrigerator, it's not as bad as leaving the stove on. Mm-hmm. But leaving the stove on is a safety for everyone involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the signs for, like, my dad was they went to church the exact same service every week for 16 years, and all of a sudden he couldn't remember what time they had to leave for church. Mm. And it really frustrated my mom about, like, we do the same thing every week. Mm-hmm. Like, why are you even asking me this question? Are you trying to make me mad? Mm-hmm. Right? So it was like early things like that were just questions to us, like, maybe, but let's see if there are other things that creep up.
Right. And to that point, if you forgot what time the church service was once or maybe twice, mm-hmm. but what is happening that we're unable to recognize something that was so familiar mm-hmm. that is now completely unfamiliar. Mm-hmm. So that would be a good indicator that the mm-hmm. familiarity of something that someone identifies with no longer identifies with that part of them.
How do you reframe what that experience is for the family members or the caregivers to help them understand they need to put themselves in a state of curiosity rather than frustration? Right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because I like the quote that says, a child isn't trying to give a parent a hard time, they're having a hard time. Mm-hmm. Because I'm trying to communicate something that my underdeveloped brain is trying its best to communicate to you, and you're not understanding me. And so for someone that is displaying signs of dementia of any kind, we have to realize that their struggle is their struggle, and they're having a hard time making sense of the world around them and making sense of themselves in the world around them. So when they're perseverating over a fact or an illogical assumption of something, when they are asking the same question over and over and over, they're not trying to drive you crazy. In their mind, they're driving themselves crazy because I cannot seem to get the answer that I'm searching for. Mm-hmm. And that's a really hard, sad place for that individual to be in. And so I think exercising your empathy muscle and your heart to say that they are hopefully trying their best, but whatever they are attempting, they're trying to make sense of themselves in the world. And we can react with frustration or react with, how can I help them understand this thing, this place, or the end result that we're looking for?
So you can see things that escalate pretty quickly because of their frustrations. So from a caregiver's perspective, probably what somebody wants to say is probably not the best thing, to take a step back. So what would you say would actually make it better, the situation? Is there something instinctively they could say rather than, getting frustrated with the individual and get through that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I love to do with the residents, even though I've got a watch on my wrist, is ask the residents what time it is. Because you give them that sense of looking at it, saying the time, and sometimes it's got the date on it so it can help orient them in that moment. Another thing would be, I like to use examples, and I know that when we're doing dishes and you think all the dishes are done, you have a good feeling about you, and then you turn around and realize there's 3 dishes left. Thought I was done.
We drained that water. Dang it.
Yes. And so imagine a resident who says, I've got everything done and I've got more to do. And then I finished it and I've got more to do. And I finished it and I've got more to do. And so as the caregiver, again, we want to say, well, don't do any of it because I'll do it all for you. Just go sit down, relax, and watch that show. But then they're watching you do all the work, and they're sitting there feeling like I'm not doing what I could be doing to help out the situation. So if someone is displaying like those feelings of I've got to do this or we've got to do that, I'm saying, all right, let's take care of it then, and help them get to their finish line, whatever that finish line may be. And then when they turn around and say the finish line was just extended, say, well, let's take a break. We can get to that if it's not pressing. Mm-hmm. There are times where they say, I've got to do it right now. I've got to see my son, or I've got to call my spouse right this moment. But oftentimes if you have a connection and a relationship with them, and you could say, well, you know what? I just called them and left a message. So we don't want to call 1 minute later. We'll call back in an hour. You can reason with them. It's really interesting at how they may get totally forgetful, but there's still the ability to reason on some level. If you explain it in a slow manner for their brain to understand, we can get to the finish line together. And I know that in the fast pace of our society and our individual nature, we want to get things done and talk things quickly, and people listening right now can hopefully keep up with how quick I'm talking. But when I'm speaking to those with dementia, I really pause between my words so that their underdeveloped brain can grasp the sentence as it's being formed, versus saying, Mom, don't worry about calling Dad. We just called Dad and it doesn't matter. He's not going to answer the phone anyway. So why do we have to call him again right now? You might as well have been speaking gibberish, because they're, as I said earlier, understanding being inside the brain that has dementia helps you understand that they can't keep up with your words and they can't keep up with what you're expressing, because as it's coming in, it's being input into their brain. It's not grasping everything. And so there's already a breakdown and miscommunication and misunderstanding if we don't slow down.
And it seems like sometimes they'll capture more the frustration and the emotion around what you're saying rather than the words.
Yes,
in
ma'am.
those instances.
I not sure if I came up with this Codyism or not, but words speak to the mind and the tone speaks to the heart. And so I really tried to speak with a smile. I tried to speak calmly and clearly. And if I feel like my frustration is getting to a tipping point, it's going to help everyone by saying, I need to go to the restroom. Not that I can't deal with you anymore, but I've been holding this in for a while and I'll be back in a few minutes, just so that you can separate yourself from that situation. Because if a child is if a tantrum is beginning to come on, you can't walk them necessarily off the ledge by speaking to them logically. You need to remove yourself, take some deep breaths, and come back with a new strategy. And sometimes it's, again, just coming back with something in your hand. Because if I've got something in my hand and I'm looking at it, it's human nature for other people to say, well, what are you holding and why are you holding it? And what are you doing with that thing? And if I set it on the table and slide it over, again, a developing brain is going to want to look at that and kind of make sense of it in their own way. And so a resident that has frustrated feelings, if I put a familiar object in front of them, it's going to elicit a whole different sense of this moment.
Interesting.
I know. Very interesting. My mind is blown, Cody.
Right?
Wow. That's fast.
You've really developed a lot of understanding around this entire subject over your 17 years plus and, helping folks. What do you think is kind of the impact that this work has had on you personally?
Certainly appreciating all the little moments, appreciating the abilities that I've got, using what I got while I've got it. If you don't use it, you lose it. There's an old Dr. Seuss quote that says, you never know the value of a moment until it becomes a memory. And I've got a endless, like Santa-sized bag of memories that I have with the countless friends that I've been able to make over these 17 years that I cherish, and I know in those moments they cherished, and these family members get to experience the silver lining in what could be a very big dark cloud of dementia. There are glimmers of hope, and so no matter how hopeless or sad or frustrating things can be on a visual level, on an audible level, on an internal or external, there is still hope. There's still value in treating humans with kindness and compassion.
100%.
I love your stories, and I'd love if you would share some of your stories about activities that you have done with the residents in kind of having them engaged or see things from a different light. Can you share some of those stories and those activities where they have been most memorable for you and for the residents as well?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I
didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just know that you got a couple up your sleeve that maybe
Yes,
you could
ma'am.
share.
You love putting people
Well,
on the
maybe a
spot.
little bit.
One thing that is just so, I guess, simple is that when folks are going to read the newspaper or something, or read the weather report for Colorado, here's the weather in Colorado, but you don't speak to the individuals in the audience. And so when I know my audience, I love to say, well, Barbara, the weather in Texas is, or the weather in Nebraska, or I have folks from Canada down to Bogota, Colombia. So we get to travel the world just by reading the weather report, because we involve the people that are in the audience. And we could say, does that sound about right for January, that it's actually this warm in this location? It stirs their mind to think about the content that's being shared. One thing that I absolutely love to do, and the first time I did this was over 10 years ago, but walkers and wheelchairs get dirty. And, activity people say, well, let's do a wheelchair wash or walker wash. And if staff are cleaning it, that's great. That's you doing your job. But a lot of these men were in the military, so they know how to use a gun. A lot of women grew up with fathers that wanted them to protect themselves, so they know how to use a rifle or a handgun. So safety's paramount, and I don't just hand it to anyone. But I have had a 94-year-old woman holding a pressure washer while smoking a cigarette, blasting wheelchairs and getting them clean. And it wasn't her wheelchair. This was another resident's wheelchair. So she is helping the people around her. Mm-hmm. She's doing something that most people would say is unsafe and shouldn't happen, and why would you consider it? But I tend to live outside the box as an individual, and I like to think outside the box. And so at my current community, I had two gentlemen, just using a power washer for at least 25, 30 minutes. And, they cleaned it, but why not let them continue to rinse it? Because what is our hurry to get to the next activity or to the next meal? Because in this moment, he's feeling useful, he's feeling happy, and we're giving back to the community around us. One thing, a big word in my engagements is gratitude. And we have written thank you cards from the housekeepers to the kitchen staff to the receptionists to the nurses. Because, of course, Nursing Week, you want to give back to the nurses. But an example would be it was National Mail Carrier Day. So we wrote up, thanks for delivering our mail with a smile, and residents signed it, and they did their best signing it. And I had a woman, all she could do was put a W for Wanda. And that was the last thing she ever signed. And so the family even said, can we have a copy of that? Because that was something that my mom gave back to the people around her. And I just love to know that they aren't always on the receiving end, but they're on the giving end. And another really special thing took place when I was working in California. I had a gentleman who was on hospice, and his diagnosis was failure to thrive. He had a stroke, so he couldn't use half of his body. And he was a gentleman from Oklahoma. And when we would do walking clubs, I would ask Lynn to hold the door open with his one good arm, and he would hold it, and he was so sweet. Hey, lady, come on in. Welcome. Just go ahead and sit right down. Just go ahead and sit right down. And he was talking, to his peers and giving them direction, and they would say, thank you for holding the door open. But then we took it a step further and bought one of those $10 back massagers where you just click the button and it vibrates. And once a week, it was loving Lynn's back rubs. And the caregivers would line up and get their back rubbed for just 20 or 30 seconds. And if you do it at the change a shift around 2 o'clock, you got a lot of people and a lot of ladies because it's senior health care. And so here was a, nearly 80-year-old man who actually graduated from hospice, was no longer failing to thrive, but had purpose and had his name on the calendar of activities. And that's an example
I have goosebumps.
of an activity, but a purposeful one, a meaningful one, and something that, I get to share on this podcast and let people know that that's a memory I will always cherish. And I know his family was so proud to see that their dad's name was on the calendar and giving to the people around him. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Wow.
Yeah. That's probably one of the best stories I've heard.
I like how they just come alive, like just the engagement and the participation. It's just, other than just you doing an activity where they're observing, they're a part of it. And it's just more meaningful. Thanks for sharing those stories.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
My pleasure.
I made her cry, so it's good. It's worth
That's
it.
pretty
That's
big.
pretty impressive.
That's pretty big. Yeah. Your heart has come out clear this entire conversation. Like it permeates everything you do. You look at things with that perspective. Where do you think the caregivers that aren't in your role or aren't of your mindset, where do you think they can make that one little change to make the same impact?
Asking yourself how you would like to be treated if you were in their situation, if the roles were reversed. It's really important to highlight the caregivers as well, because in my first few years, Tasha, I would come in and say, how's Barbara? How's Hazel? How's, all of these residents? But it's really important to ask, how's Nicole doing and how's Tasha doing? Because if you're cared for, you're going to give better care. So caregivers are notorious for helping everybody else and themselves last. And so if there is a organization or industry that the individual is working for, it's really important for that organization to recognize the people that are their workforce, and not just a collective workforce, but the individual amongst the team members, just as I'm trying to do with the individuals that are kind of grouped together as residents. It's important to play some of their likes, right? Because here's an example. My residents all know who Elvis Presley is, or the Osmonds, or Frank Sinatra. But back when Justin Timberlake had his Bringin' Sexy Back, I had a caregiver that says, I wish we could listen to that. Why can't we, right? And so telling the residents, hey, here's an Elvis song, but the Elvis of today is this guy, and I'm not a fan of Justin Bieber, but I play plenty of his music so that my staff members could put a little pep in their step and energize them. And then the residents are watching them smile because we're recognizing them as an individual. We're putting on something they're familiar with, and we're exposing residents to new music, new things. And, one of my Codyisms is give the residents what they want and give them stuff they don't know to ask for. And that's a real important thing to help caregivers recognize too, because as creatures of habit, we just get in the habit and start doing things the way we've always done things. So reminding them, encouraging them, and even challenging them to step back and say, well, why don't you try this music when you're getting them up in the morning? Why don't you try, using some of your colloquialisms, right? Because I love how today's generation says, I got you. It's like this term that they say, I've got you. And recognizing the caregiver and telling them thank you goes such a long way. Again, the older generation always sign the thank you cards and such. So when a resident, be it 60 or 90, can give a thank you card to a caregiver who's 17 or 57 because they've been doing it for a long time, chances are they're going to hold on to that and say, this is a reminder of why I do what I do. And it's the difference of falling flat on your face or finishing that race for the day because you were seen, you were heard, and you were valued. Ideally by the resident, but by your boss or by your coworker, by your peer, and as family members, by one another.
That sounds like a 360-degree lesson, right? You want your residents to be seen, heard, and valued. You want the caregivers to receive the same. Yeah.
You do talk about the importance of music and how you incorporate music in with your not only the residents, but the caregivers. Is there a particular way that you use music in bringing out memories for the residents? You have a little bit of a. You were telling me about this process that you have with music. Can you share that with the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely.
'Cause I love that story.
I love exploring music with the residents, and the conversation you and I were having was the residents know Frank Sinatra, and when we hear Frank Sinatra, we might think of one song and you might think of another, but truly his span of his musical career was everything from the Bobby Soxers of the 50s on up to him reinventing his career in the 80s and singing Beatles songs. And so trying to really identify the song that is most impactful to the person is huge. And one thing I kind of came across was music that's real impactful to us is around that age of 16 to 19 years old. We listen to a lot of our parents' stuff, and that has a whole emotional tie to it as well. But what I had done was looked up the top radio hits of 75 to 79, and that would be for someone that was born in 1960. Because when they were 15, 16, 17 years old, trying to figure out who they were and their own personality and what they really enjoyed, when I put on the top 100 radio songs, they recognized 1 and 2, 3 and 4 didn't mean all that much, but I remember it was song like 16 or 17 that a resident that was kind of listening to us, just their head tilted up and they were looking around and they were smiling a little bit more. And again, if we have eyes to see, we can recognize that. And I recognized that her body language changed based on this one song. And so I played that song again and again and knew that it meant something specifically to that individual. And again, it's important to ask because I had a guy who loved country music, and his ability to communicate was rather limited. And so I would put country music on Monday and again on Tuesday and again on Wednesday. And then I said, George, can I put on some country music for you? And he goes, mm-hmm. And so it was just that validation that I am doing what I believe is right. But imagine how I would have felt if he would have been, just maybe my good intention was wearing him out because maybe he's had enough of that country music, So really, music is a beautiful thing because it speaks to so many different parts of the brain, that if the right side is more deteriorated or the front is, the music really helps make connections throughout the entire brain that is, again, so complex. We're still learning about it. But I thoroughly enjoy using music. And with today's technology, there's really no excuse that people can't explore it, because again, to say, well, I always put on the big band music because my dad loved the big band music. That's still a wide genre of music. And I could tell you about the Andrews Sisters or Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, because like I said, I got my start a while ago. But I love giving them what they want. And then Bruno Mars has got some great dance moves and some great beats in his music that I've had residents kind of boogie in their chair more to that, which they're very unfamiliar with than they would with what they are familiar with. So definitely music is just a great avenue to explore and not necessarily, you don't know it all. And
it's universal and timeless.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What is one piece of advice that you would give to our audience that is just stepping into the world of this experience with their loved one that could help them in just being grounded through the process?
Folks will say, well, what does your loved one like to do? What do they enjoy doing? And be it 60 to 90, if they are losing their abilities, oftentimes they don't like to do what they used to do because in gardening, it's not making sense. Or in trying to fix something, I'm unable to fix it. So now I'm frustrated because I'm unsuccessful where I used to be so successful. So paying attention to their expressions. And I like to say, what makes your loved one smile? Because if it's talking about being a civil engineer, we don't have to design a whole bridge all over again. We could just talk about it and pull out a book that has pictures in it and say, and even if I know the answer, Tasha, I don't really recognize that. Do you? And if they say no, well, we're on the same page because neither of us recognize it. Versus me saying, come on, Tasha, you do know what this is. You ought to recognize it. That's me telling you, you're not your old self. You're not remembering what you used to know so well. And no human wants to highlight their inabilities or what they are incapable of. And so, again, having a man hold the door open as people are walking through is something that they can successfully do a lot of the times. And that feeling stays with them of being helpful and being useful. I'm a big believer on the chicken soup for the souls because there's everything. And at our community, we've got for the cat lover, the dog lover, for the veteran, so that when you're reading it to the resident, those stories are nice and short. Oftentimes they can follow along. And to kind of go back to a real experience, after reading it to an audience one time, I said, what did you think of that? And a lady goes, well, I like the one about the dogs, but you can skip the one about the cats. And that's her being her and her personality. So right now I have a woman, I love getting hugs from Dottie because she doesn't just hug you, she squeezes you. And she squeezes you and holds you pretty much until you let go. So this is something that I look forward to. And I know that when I do let go and she let go, her smile is 3 times as big as it was before I initiated that hug. So we don't have to be successful in the way of us seeing what success is, because allowing them to just be who they are is so important without the pressure of being who they are. And one thing, a story that I knew I wanted to share on this particular podcast. A lot of residents used to play instruments, and you'll say, oh, could you play this? Or family will say, I want you to do this, or can you still play, or would you play? And all of those are a request to do something that a resident who is unsure of themselves is unsure I can perform, and no one wants to underperform. And so it must have been about 10 years ago that I said to a resident, hey, would you come sit next to me on the piano bench? Would you just sit next to me? I want to show you something. And I don't play, but I pressed a few keys and maybe an octave or two, and the woman's watching me, and then she puts her hands down and she starts playing, and she starts doing a melody that, had I said, could you play or would you play, 90+% of the time they say, no, I can't anymore, I don't want to, and why would I? And like, are you expecting me to do a whole concert? Because again, there's that perception of, why are you asking me this? And I don't know that I can meet the expectation that you're not even putting on me, but I'm putting on myself. You know, we put expectations on ourselves. So really lowering that expectation so that they can be successful in whatever it is they're doing. Because if the woman just sits next to me on the piano and she doesn't even touch the keys, guess what? I still had a moment with this person. And I remember a gentleman who, he played only the black keys for nearly 20 minutes. And it was so special to see, because when I told family, they said, we've never known him to play the piano. And again, he didn't necessarily play a melody, but he was exploring. And he was figuring out that deep light somewhere in the middle. And this was him, you know, again, exploring the environment around him through just a little invitation without an expectation.
I like that.
Well.
Oh, yep. Yep. Okay, that was quite the discussion. I don't, is there anything else that you'd like to share that we didn't ask you about, that we didn't cover? Any stories or anything that I'm Phil. I am telling you, like, I'm just, it was an amazing conversation from my perspective. But
I am super thankful that you caught me, right? When we first met, you caught me as I was leaving the building to introduce yourself to me. And I am so thankful for that, because this is one of the better conversations around something that we both have personal connection to. And I know our audience is really going to dig into.
You know, I thank you for that, right? I am just, as I say, doubly blessed, because I get to bless my residents and love of my residents, but am loved by them and blessed by them. And so to share my experiences and to share some, you know, creative solutions with the audience that's listening, I hope that they can find success in what I've shared. And it's truly an honor to do that, to be a part of this. And I mean, I could continue talking about it. I could continue sharing, and I'm just grateful, you know, that word just keeps coming back again from my Granny Kitty. I was grateful for all the little things that we don't know where they're going to play out in life. And so here we are. And I thank you both, and thank you, audience, for listening. And yeah.
The last thing that I would like to say, and then I'll let you have final words. I think when families look for a community for their loved one to live out, you know, maybe the rest of their life, I think they miss the element of paying attention to who are the caregivers within the building, right? They're looking at the space and what the amenities are. And I would encourage the audience to really pay attention to who are the caregivers and what is that impact? Because above and beyond what the facility structure is, the community is because of the engagement that the caregivers have, right? So I would say pay attention to that even more than what are the fees, what are the rooms, what does it smell like, what does it look like, right? It's the day-to-day interaction with caregivers like you that I know that I would want my family to experience. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Absolutely. And yes, similar to that, you know, we in the community help to cultivate the relationships, right? And so often it's like, hey, Tasha, I want to introduce you to my friend Nicole. Nicole, this is my friend Tasha. She runs an awesome program. Saying who the person is and one thing, highlight about them that you would want them to share kind of on your behalf. You can see residents have a more sense of comfortability, because when you sit at a table and I were to sit across from you and go, oh, I I remember saying hi to you one time, or we've sat here 30 plus times. I just can't remember who you are or where you're from, and I'm too embarrassed to ask that. When team members or family members don't say, hey, Mom, do you know who this is? Or, hey, Nicole, do you know where we are? You don't put that pressure on them, but you say, hey, Nicole, here's where we are, and this is what we're doing here, and this is someone I want to introduce you to. I've had residents say, I know who that is, and it's so wonderful to kind of help bring those walls down, and again, just kind of till that soil of watching a budding friendship, because in communities, if you've got 3 teachers, you ought to recognize them and introduce the teachers day in and day out, and in the morning and at lunch, and then again at exercise in the evening or what have you, so that you can help them form those friendships and those bonds, because we love things that are familiar, because then they feel comfortable, and then we have that reassurance that we're in a comfortable place. So I just kind of wanted to add that to what you were sharing.
That's great.
I'll tell you what, use it until you lose it. Those are good words to live by. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies.
Cody, thank you for reminding us that dementia does not erase humanity, connection, or joy, and that how we communicate can change everything. This conversation is such an important reminder that even when the journey looks different than we imagined, it can still be meaningful, rich, and fulfilled with moments of connection.
And if today's conversation resonated with you or brought up questions about supporting a loved one with dementia, you can learn more about Cody's work at Belleview Heights, part of Sunshine Retirement Living. We've included links to the community and resources in our show notes.
You can also connect with Cody on LinkedIn, where he shares insight, advocacy, and a whole lot of heart. All of those links are also available in the show notes.
Because when it comes to dementia, the right understanding doesn't just improve care, it transforms relationships.
We are Tasha Beckman and Nicole Rabalato, and this has been another episode of the Empowered Elder Podcast, where every conversation helps you live wisely, love deeply, and age with purpose.
Until next time, take care, stay present, and remember, even when memory fades, connection remains.